Welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark, owner and founder of Clark Law Group. They specialize in auto collisions, motorcycle crashes, workplace accidents, and personal injury law, and they are dedicated to helping clients every step of the way. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is From Symptoms to Settlements, Navigating the Complexities of TBI Cases in Nevada Personal Injury Law. Jared, so good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
All right, so brain injuries, obviously they're a big talking point in recent years, especially with everything in sports, particularly football, and just understanding the brain more as we do every year with technology and medical advancements. From your experience, what makes a traumatic brain injury case particularly unique or even challenging in personal injury cases?
Brain injuries are very unique. You know, you got 11 systems in the human body. This is by far the most complex. This is a system that connects everything else, right? Your muscular system, your skeletal system, your neurological system is very complicated. So with that, you got to treat it different. Right? The workup on that, the diagnosis, the doctors that you're seeing. Oftentimes, brain injuries are what we could call permanent injuries. Other injuries to the body, soft tissue, those aren't permanent. They are permanent to a degree. I don't want to get into too much of the technical side of things.
We're not a medical podcast, everybody.
Right. Okay. I want an objection to that. So I had to put that out there. But, you know, those are oftentimes considered permanent injury that have effects that interfere with, you know, daily living. And they can last for the rest of your life, you know, depending on what your life expectancy is, how young you are when you start to experience these symptoms, they can last for the rest of your life. So it's important that they're addressed properly. The experts that need to be on those type of cases are completely different than experts that need to be on other cases to make sure that they're documenting what's going on and what assistance you may need for the rest of your life to make sure that you have the best life possible, you know, under that condition.
And I would imagine, I mean, seeking compensation for these kind of things is probably tough. I mean, the symptoms of TBIs, they can be a lot different than visible injuries. I mean, obviously there can be some more obvious, you know, symptoms, but a lot of them are somewhat hidden.
They are. And that's what makes, like anything, if there's a hidden danger right before you, an invisible danger, and you trip over it, even though it's invisible, it makes things complicated. You couldn't see it, right? And that's kind of how you have to look at brain injuries. One, it's inside your skull. Two, there's a lot of research that's always evolving when it comes to traumatic brain injuries and what's kind of the standard or peer reviewed as scientists continue to discover new things and how certain external environments and blunt force trauma changes the things that are going on in your body. You know, you got mild traumatic brain injuries, you got moderate traumatic brain injuries, and you have significant or major traumatic brain injuries. Even mild traumatic brain injuries, that would be a concussion, right? Where you're disoriented, and we have all seen, hopefully, the movie Concussion, which was a great movie with Will Smith exposing exactly what was going on in the NFL with athletes sustaining concussions, right? And exactly what that does to the brain. And then, you know, they discovered CTE, which is, you know, a permanent issue that comes from traumatic brain injuries, repeated traumatic brain injuries.
That word mild can be confusing. It's not a salsa. Mild is not mild by the terms we understand that word.
Correct. You know, there's been times at my prior firm, you know, had a case where the doctors were considering it mild. You were seeing the daily effects from the client and how it just was. I mean, it was a major interference with his life, you know. Had to have a 3-prong cane, had a helmet, and they're using the terms mild. So it is a misnomer. I think when it comes to traumatic brain injury, you know, maybe what a lay person would consider, well, what does that mean for the, you know, the person with the symptoms or the condition? Mild rarely means mild in day-to-day terms.
Can you kind of explain some of the long-term effects that you see of a TBI and how these might influence potential compensation a victim could receive?
Yeah. So when it comes to traumatic brain injuries, some of the symptoms that you often see are, you know, loss of memory. Probably the biggest is cognition error. Your ability to reason, right? Your frontal cortex lobe gets disturbed. Your ability to judge properly. Behavioral issues, anxiety, PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. These are all symptoms and things that, you know, depending on the severity of the brain injury, you may have to live with for the rest of your life. And obviously, these are things that interfere with every aspect of life. Whether you want to go and play a hobby, whether you play sports, whether you're working and your concentration at your job, you know, if you have a high level functioning job, to know that your cognition is impaired and you can't think how you used to, you can't reason how you used to, that's a big deal. it almost feels like you're being stripped of all the important and valuable things in life, right? So what does that mean? Obviously, the value of the case needs to reflect that, right? The value of the case needs to reflect the harms and damages that were done. Yeah. So with all that in mind, obviously that's going to be different from, if you see the chiropractor for 2.5 months and you experience a soft tissue injury. These are things that need to be considered, and we need to make sure that the insurance company has a full comprehensive view of how this has affected the client, and make sure that the value of that verdict, settlement, award reflects it as well.
You mentioned you played basketball. I used to play hockey. I played a lot of backyard football with my buddies and stuff. And there's been plenty of times where someone gets their bell rung, right? That's what we would say. We'd be like, oh, got my bell rung. Let's shake the cobwebs and get a drink of water and keep playing and all that. Can you talk about the importance of seeking medical attention after an accident if you feel that quote unquote bell rung kind of feeling?
Yes. If that bell rung, I've heard that phrase many a times, obviously growing up playing sports as well. And, you playing hockey, I know you probably know more about concussions than I do. It's important for traumatic brain injuries that you seek medical help immediately. And the reason is it's that traumatic brain injuries, it's more of a progressive type of injury. So it's not like all of the symptoms manifest immediately. In fact, it's usually baseline of about a year. If you really experience a true traumatic brain injury, you have a baseline of where the symptoms may be at for the rest of your life, or, how significant they're going to get. It takes a while. It's a progressive injury. So to have that documented early, I could tell you the specialists, they could start making the referrals that they need to make early on to catch anything as it relates to particular MRIs. Right? You need to make sure that you're using the DTI type imaging. There's standards that these doctors need to adhere to try to catch the injury early on to get you the proper treatment so it does not progress, or maybe it's mitigated at least.
And these tests you're talking about, how do these determine the severity of a TBI, and how is it, more importantly from your standpoint, how is it used in court to support a personal injury claim? That's
a good question, Kevin. I could tell you what a lot of people don't realize is that we are required to hire experts to prove your claim. Okay. Experts are doctors, economists, vocationalists, rehab experts. We have to hire them to effectively say, what's going on with you, right? To present to a jury to make sure that they give the full award that's needed. So, as they're doing these tests, one, they're providing diagnosis, so you know exactly what's going on with you, but they're also trying to issue a prognosis. How is this going to affect you for the rest of your life? And what other medical care may you need in moving forward? Okay. So these examinations, these MRIs, CAT scans, there's a plethora of different tests that they do to make sure that they're trying to capture all the different impairments that has occurred as a result of the traumatic brain injury.
What other evidence do you gather to prove the extent of a client's TBI and its impact on their life?
So the primary ones are medical records, obviously medical billing. Life care planners are very important. To have somebody, a licensed medical professional, to come in and ascertain what are you going to need in moving forward, right? What future MRIs, what future, if it's some injections for some reason, what future tests are you going to need? Let's say the life expectancy is, 75 years of age, right? And you're only 50, right? Well, they need to spell out what information and what exams, medical care are going to be needed for the rest of your life. What living assistant, maybe if you need a nurse to come 2 or 3 times a day to help with things at the house, that's something else that they need to make sure and include in the life care plan in assessing what values are going to be needed. And all that has to go in the settlement or the jury trial, right? I always tell clients, you only get one stab at the apple. All right. And you don't have a chance to piecemeal or, hey, this is where I'm at now, but I'm going to be okay later. It's important that the doctors do a full workup to make sure they are identifying to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, as a term or the legal standard here in Nevada, that you will need this for the rest of your life. We want to make sure and capture that and include that. Loss of earnings. Oftentimes, these are the type of injuries that will have you lose your job, right? What were you earning? What was your earning potential, right? What did your retirement plan look like? These are all things that we have to get experts who understand and study this stuff to come in and testify or write these reports to make sure that they're spelling out, one, to the insurance company on their side, and whether it's an arbitrator, a mediator, or a jury, the full harm that has happened. So it could get very complicated. It could get very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. How about witness testimony of like spouses, family members, parents, friends? Do those have a big impact in court?
They do. Those have a huge impact in court. We call them, a lot of them, but recipient witnesses or before and afters.
Before
right?
and after, yeah.
There is not somebody probably more important than if you have a spouse who is going to be able to testify about their observations of who their spouse was before the traumatic brain injury and who their spouse was after the traumatic brain injury. How does that affect their intimacy level? That's a huge issue. Sometimes the spouse could have what's called a loss of consortium claim, right? And that's effectively where, this is interfering with what has happened to me. It's a derivative claim that stems from, the spouse. That type of evidence is really what drives value to mediators, arbitrators, and juries to really, that's the human element of it. When you have humans that's coming in and testifying about who this person was, what they could do, and now what they can't do. What did they love to do before that? Or what can they do, but they could do with limitations, right? So that human story, that raw authenticity, that raw truth coming from people who love this person and had a chance to, know this person before, oftentimes it's a different person after.
But that's particularly impactful when it goes to a jury.
It is very. And the insurance companies are aware of that, right? There's always a lot of gray area, at least for them to try to make certain arguments. But, they know that it's a gamble. And when you hear, the nuclear verdicts or nuclear resolutions, oftentimes there's a traumatic brain injury involved. And they know that, once that human element comes in, they're gambling if they want to take that to trial, because you can't put a value on that, right? You just really can't. And they know that juries, if it's presented the right way, will resonate with that, possibly give the full award that, that person deserves.
How do insurance companies typically respond to TBI claims?
These are the type of claims where they like to fight, right?
That's because of that gray area you just spoke about, I would imagine.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, even when it comes to, so part of what we are able to recover for a settlement or a jury verdict is what's known as general damages is a legal term, pain and suffering is a layman's term. And that is, how did this affect your life? Well, there's not a quantifiable component you could put on that, right? There's not a metric system that we use. Medical bills are a little easier, right? That's a definitive, okay, if your bill was $10,000, right? Well, it's fair that they award that to make sure that those bills were paid from the at-fault party. But when you talk about pain and suffering and traumatic brain injuries and all the different elements of this person's life who has changed, that's where it's going to be contested, right? That's where the insurance companies are going to try to diminish that. They're going to hire their own experts, right, to kind of come up with these opinions, which I always find interesting. These are experts that have never, ever met the client.
They know everything about it, right?
They know everything about the client, right? After reading some records or bills that may have been 2-3 years old. So, that's where those before and after witnesses really come in, and it could really, really drive the value, with that. So that's important.
I can feel your passion for representing people. Where does that come from, you think?
I got to say my family, right? How we operate in our personal life should be how we operate in our professional lives. And I'm a true believer of that, right? My mom and dad, I come from a very loving, supporting family. And, we care. I don't know if you had a chance to check out some of the prior work that we've done or not prior to this, some of the videos on YouTube, but it's really simple. We actually care. We move with our heart first, right? We understand the human element of what you're going through. I remember when I decided to become a lawyer, I actually wanted to be a pharmacist or a doctor. And about a couple of years into undergrad, I switched. To speak on behalf of someone else, there's probably not a greater responsibility to me in the world, right? When the light is off, right? You're speaking for somebody, and they could be at work, they could be doing whatever they're doing. That's a responsibility that I don't take lightly. And we have a duty to do it, one, not only ethically, but I think to do it humanly, because we are dealing with human harms, right? We are dealing with amputations or, surgeries. And, what does that do when people go through this traumatic time in their life? It really affects them, right? And it's a human dealing with another human. Who else, we relate, right? We all go through the same thing. I say the human experience is very similar for a lot of people. Right. So to really just kind of build that connection with my clients is something that's important to us and allows us to get to know their story better and advocate, on their behalf a lot stronger.
If anyone listening feels they've had a TBI or knows they've had a TBI, feels they're not being treated fairly, what should they do?
Number one, you should call Clark Law Group. Give us a call. We have been at this for a while. We do a good job. Again, if you're looking for someone who cares, someone who really wants to get down to the root of why you are going through what you're going through and how to get you compensated, and that's what we're here for. Honest, ethical representation, but aggressive at the same time.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate that, Jared. It's very cool to see someone who works hard and loves what they do for other people.
I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark. To connect with the team, head to injuryattorneyvegas.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We always appreciate that. Jared, great seeing you again. Thanks so much for your time.
It's been a blast. I appreciate it, Kevin. Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.